So the last video for Chapter 8, we're going to talk about a more detailed version of that game theory model from the last video. Although we're not going to go into the math too much, I think the results of the model are important to think about. So this is a model from Sutton. Basically, we have that same type of two-stage setup where firms compete in two stages. In the first stage, they have to decide whether to enter the market, which requires a startup cost that is a sunk cost, right? So remember, a sunk cost disappears after you enter the market. You can't get it back. And then in the second stage, firms compete in output or in price. So there's two possible versions, and we'll talk about the results from both of them. One is that the sunk costs are exogenous, right? So this is similar to where we have natural barriers to entry. Maybe there's a certain minimum efficient scale, and so there's only going to be a few firms in the market. And in the second, sunk costs are endogenous, right? And then we'll talk about different ways that firms can make those endogenous sunk costs, right? And that leads to different results. So the results in the exogenous case are that as the market size increases, so as that market size gets bigger and bigger, concentration falls. And so we have less and less concentration. Similarly, as the market size gets smaller, we have more and more concentration. We also have that concentration increases with sunk costs. So if there are large sunk costs, we're going to have fewer firms, right? There's going to be a more concentrated market. And tougher competition, which decreases profits, causes concentration to increase. And so that makes a certain amount of sense because fewer firms are going to be able to enter the market, and they have more to gain with higher profits there. So with endogenous sunk costs, this is a little different, right? And so the most important difference is that products differ in real or perceived quality, right? So it could be that we have real quality differences that everybody can agree on, or perceived quality differences, which are not in fact real, but might be based on something like brand or advertising. So we can think about research and development as one, but we can also think of, as advertising as another. And so this is going to be important because the major difference in the two models is that the concentration sort of stops, right? We get the market size does not continue to decrease concentration below a certain amount, right? And so there's some minimum level of concentration. And I think that could be a realistic view of sort of what we see, right? If you think about the cell phone market, for example, that's a huge market. So the market size is gargantuan. But we do see some sort of limit to concentration. Now, that said, we do see a lot of new entrants trying to get into there, into the market, but we still see, companies like Apple and Samsung with significant market share. So concentration is still pretty high. So if we think about the data, early sort of empirical studies did find that demand, so how much demand there was, market size, as well as cost conditions do influence industry concentration, so that when concentration is high, it is also high, in other countries sort of around the world that support sort of technology and cost arguments. Concentration tends to be positively correlated with the minimum efficient scale and capital intensity. So if the minimum efficient scale is high, right, so we have that downward sloping average cost curve, then we'll have a more concentrated industry. Outside the US, mergers are an important cause of high industry concentration. I mean, I think that might be more true within the US in the last 10 to 20 years as well. We think about, the fact that T-Mobile and Sprint are being allowed to merge right now. But one argument that Scherer and Ross said about at least manufacturing in 1990, so this is a little bit out of date now, is that concentration seems to be, more than we would expect based on the minimum efficient scale. And so one question is, why is that? And so Smiley did a survey and basically asked product managers from major corporations to determine the importance of different strategic entry deterrents in the US. And so this is, again, old data. Surveys are not something that economists use a lot. Kind of depends on the field, but they can be useful in terms of strategic behavior. And so he talked about 8 potentially important practices that are designed to make entry less attractive. So these are really the things in Sutton's model that could be those endogenous barriers to entry, right? So advertising, hiding profits. So if you can hide profits, then potential entrants might not realize how profitable your industry is, and so they might not enter. Brand proliferation. So if we go back to our first video for chapter 8 and think about all the cereal brands, then you can think about these 5 companies trying to offer lots of different brands to fill all of those niches. Research and development. So this would be a good thing from a consumer's point of view, right? Offering better products more cheaply, but it also increases some costs. Reputation. So develop a reputation for competitiveness, right? If a new entrant comes in, you're going to hit them hard with low prices, higher output, decrease their profitability. A learning curve, so you expand output today to gain experience and lower future costs. I think that's really important, especially for new industries. Excess capacity. So if you have a bunch of factories that are only operating at 50%, but a new entrant comes in, then you can increase capacity and drive them out of business. And then limit pricing, which is related to excess capacity. You can drop the price and increase output in order to drive them out of business. And so his results were that in new products, advertising was really important, an R&D patent was important. And then some of these had, somewhat less importance: reputation, learning curve, excess capacity, and then limit pricing was only at 9%. For mature products, advertising, hiding profit, and brand proliferation were the most important, and then R&D, patents, and reputation. And still important, excess capacity and limit pricing. So firms are definitely engaging in these, trying to keep out potential entrants. They don't want potential entrants to come into the industry, increase competition, and reduce profits for everybody.